super excited to lead this chat because Pfizer, if you don't know it, is totally redoing their entire sort of brand and marketing playbook. You probably saw that during the pandemic. Drew, who is the new CMO, comes from the industry itself, from Disney and Google, and so you're seeing sort of probably the first example of pharma truly becoming a mass market brand. I think it's probably one of the most exciting times. I mean, given sort of that you've been working with the collective group inside of Pfizer now for 7 months, but collectively over your career for the last, I don't know, decades or decade. Super exciting. So anyway, I'm just thrilled. I want to introduce you to Wendy Aldrich. She is the VP Global Integrated Marketing Strategy at Pfizer. You've been there for about 7 months now. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your career. I know that there is this sort of deep Disney connection to Pfizer now. Tell us a little bit about that and how you came to end up at Pfizer.
So I used to work with Drew, the CMO at Pfizer, at Disney about 14 years ago. And so since that time, I went to the agency side. I worked at OMD on Visa. I then went to Initiative and worked on Amazon. And then I went to and worked on Hulu. So that was about a 13-year span working on other major brands. And then I took a sabbatical for a year. Literally did not work. I did some consulting. I did some charity work. I went back to school, did the executive management program at UCLA, and was really waiting for the right next thing. And I feel like I've been very fortunate to work on really cool brands and have done some really cool things. And I did not want to just take another job. I needed a break. I think everybody has been there. And so I actually got contacted by a recruiter for a job at Pfizer and had remembered, I was like, I think Drew went there. And so we reconnected, and that's how I got to Pfizer, have zero healthcare experience. And the funny thing is that this job is like everything that I was looking for, and it just kind of came together. So I feel very fortunate to be here. It's a really good place.
And I think it's a good learning experience, which is, in your career, you're going to bump into work with people, and it can take 14 years for that to mature much later on. Right place, right time, and that then becomes the next big stepping stone in your career, which is, I think, for everybody in the room, starting out as either a junior media planner or client service or working on the brand side, just even as a junior person. It's amazing how these things come to mature and come together and then become sort of a major pivotal career move as things come together.
Timing is everything.
Timing is everything. So tell us, specifically, I think it's really interesting that you said that you had no pharma experience. You came to Pfizer. Drew obviously had very little pharma experience. Emmanuel, who just joined, also from Disney at Pfizer, probably didn't have a huge amount of pharma experience. Tell us what it's a little bit like seeing what it was at a entertainment company with probably the most recognizable or one of the most recognizable brands, going to a pharma company that has like a P and a F in the first 2 letters, which is probably a little bit less recognizable as a consumer brand. Talk about what your experience is going from one to the other.
So it's funny because I think a lot of people wonder that, Drew is actually building out his team with people who have non-pharma experience because I think he wants to push the envelope. He wants to do things different. He wants to show up and be very un-pharma. And so we've got plenty of people within the company that know pharma, thank God, because I rely on them every day and I have a ton to learn. But having outside experience and bringing that into the company is going to help them transform the way that they do things. And so it's kind of a blessing and a curse. So when I show up to meetings and I don't know what the limitations are, as do a lot of the other people who are coming on board, which is good because that's getting people to think outside the box a little bit. And it's super exciting, to be honest, because pharma does things in a certain way. Pfizer on the spectrum of that is pretty conservative historically, and so Drew wants us to really think about, like, how do we evolve and do things really differently.
You had mentioned that the kinds of paths or ways that you think about strategy, about go-to-market at Disney is not too dissimilar from how you're approaching it at Pfizer, which you would think would be extraordinarily different. You know, if you're thinking about theme parks and streaming services and the Disney brand, you would think that that would be, you know, a totally different type of activation than at Pfizer. But you were saying no, a lot of the things were actually quite similar.
Yeah.
Share more about that.
Well, so I think what's really interesting is there's so many parallels between big brands, right? So Disney's in a little bit of a different place because it's ubiquitous. It very much is a family-friendly brand. Everybody knows it. You know, pharma's a little bit different. People don't like pharma. People think it's big bad and just trying to make money. And so part of our job is to get people to trust the brand, you know, feel good about the brand. And so that's a big job, but there's so much experience that the people who are coming into the organization have from working on other big brands that I think is gonna help Pfizer, you know, kind of recapture that. And so you know, everything that we're doing is not only brand building, but a lot of performance media too. So we kind of do the whole spectrum. And I love this job because it's literally bringing together like all the past experience that I have, from consumer insights to, you know, marketing transformation to, you know, just really the whole spectrum. And so there actually is a lot of parallels between working on other big brands and then coming here.
I mean, it feels like it's almost like when you walk into Disney, because it's such a beloved brand, you're maintaining it, the level of effort to maintain and keep it loved, unless there's a hiccup somewhere in the consumer experience. Coming into Pfizer, because of the baggage that comes along with just pharma in general, you're effectively applying all of your capabilities that you learned at Disney and then some to actually create that same brand love and affinity that you have with Disney, which I think is it's an amazing career challenge.
It is a challenge. But I think we're literally doing the right things to get there, and that experience is invaluable. You know, so Drew has also worked at Google, he's worked at Best Buy, he's worked at a lot of other big companies, and so, you know, I think he's bringing that into the organization. But all the brands that I've worked on too have been pretty beloved, like Amazon and Hulu, and like very, you know, well-liked brands. And, you know, but I've worked on them during periods of transformation, which I think is what the parallel is coming into Pfizer.
So you had mentioned, like, can we sort of spend a couple minutes just talking about, like, what are the challenges broadly in pharma in terms of the different playbook that you need to think about? I think you mentioned that, you know, pharma in general, just as an industry, there's a concern about, you know, what it's trying to do, and I think, you know, brand marketing helps pivot that and sort of leans into what it can sort of solve. We had talked a little bit about what those challenges are. Do you want to sort of share that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think, you know, everybody puts drugs in their body, right? So that's, you know, that's a ubiquitous thing. But I think there historically has been a lot of distrust. Like, people don't really, you know, or even pay attention to the manufacturer of your drug, right? So when we were going through our agency review process, one of the agencies came in and said 80% of people that put drugs in their bodies don't even know who manufactured the drug, right? So there's very little brand association with how people use pharma. And, you know, we want to change that. We think, you know, during the pandemic, you know, everybody was asking for their preferred vaccine because there was so much discussion around it. I know way before I worked at Pfizer, asked for the Pfizer vaccine because that was a trusted brand in my mind. I didn't know Moderna as well. And so, you know, there is value in the brand. And so, you know, why not have anytime you go to the doctor, ask for the brand that you trust the most.
Yeah, we talked about actually the Pfizerization of the brand, and that being one of the major pivoting, strategy points that is going to sort of move us forward. Do you want to talk about that Pfizerization, how that comes about, what that looks like, maybe the example during the pandemic where there was that pivot associated with it?
So, we are, starting to more associate Pfizer with all of the individual products. So, there is, we realized during the pandemic that there is value in the brand. And so, putting some muscle behind that is one of the things that we're doing. So if you see any, we have 30 brands that we're working on right now to support with marketing. Like any of those brands will be associated with Pfizer, which historically wasn't always the case.
And that's a big change in, I think, overall strategy. You just see the drug name, but you have no idea who actually manufactured it.
A drug name you can't pronounce.
Well, we're gonna get into that in a second. But actually, starting on that point, since we're talking about the pandemic, and probably people in this room don't even know this, what was the name of the COVID vaccine that Pfizer created?
It was Comirnaty.
Comirnaty was the vaccine, and they could have marketed Comirnaty, but they didn't market Comirnaty. They marketed the Pfizer vaccine. So that was like a turning pivot point in sort of the marketing of drugs in general, especially with a drug that is going to be as ubiquitous as the vaccine, the COVID vaccines were. And I think that started that moment where there was a sort of a change in how the brand would go to market, because now there's sort of brand love associated. We sort of talked a little bit about Intel Inside, where Pfizer will start to define how and where the brand shows up as a way to better associate with the quality of the drugs themselves. So when you're thinking about sort of marketing strategy going forward and media strategy, we were sort of talking about sort of a fun little exercise on like how Pfizer, at least traditionally, has come up with some of these brand names. I think you did a little homework. We were going through, I went on the website. Anyway, just for this room, does anybody know or like raising your hand, what is a Pfizer drug by name? Does somebody know? Go ahead.
She doesn't count.
She doesn't count. She works for Pfizer. But we're talking about Litfulo, Oxtoriata, Etrasimod. I know I had this.
Xeljanz.
Huh? Xeljanz is advertised enough that you're like, I don't know what that is, but I see that brand all the time. Acetylcysteine, something. Bostonifib. Is that right? Or am I missing it?
Maybe this is why we should promote
Paxlovid, actually, because at least
That's
has
a good
Pax,
one.
which is like
Most people know
peace, and Lovid
Paxlovid.
is like you sort of know what a Lovid is, right? So, how do brands get defined inside of Pfizer, and then how are you thinking about that?
So when Harry asked me this question, I had no idea. So I had to do a little research, but there actually is a page on the Pfizer website that explains how we come up with the drug names. All I know, I'll summarize this, it can take up to 4 years for a drug name to actually get to market. And the scientists and the people creating it actually create the name based on the formula to create the drug. And I think all pharma companies come up with a different enough name so it distinguishes one drug from another so that there's no confusion when it gets prescribed. Because you don't want to prescribe one thing and intend to do another. So they're very different, they're very unique and hard to pronounce.
But there's like 7 vowels next to each other.
Yeah, well, I learned that there's certain letters that you cannot put in the drug name. There's like 4 letters in the alphabet that you cannot actually put in a drug name. I can't remember what they are, but crazy rules.
And I think that goes back to sort of what Drew, in our conversations said, which is, that connection with Pfizer then becomes more and more important as a way to sort of break through when it comes to some of these names. Mm-hmm. And that you saw it with the Super Bowl ad, which was really less about the drug, a specific drug itself, and more about the fact that it's about creating these moments of health and safety and reinforcement that this is really sort of a way to solve fundamental problems of living. And like this creates better lifestyle, better health, and sort of longer life in general.
I think if people, understood the effectiveness of a drug that they took and that they attributed that success to Pfizer, I think it will help them the next time if they have a choice to treat a different condition that they may prefer Pfizer.
So as we think about sort of the marketing transformation that you're sort of exploring, can you walk through sort of just broadly speaking, what are those steps around the marketing transformation that you guys think, where will we see the brand in, call it 6 months, a year, 2 years from now?
It's going to be much more prominent. I'll tell you just from my team's perspective. So I oversee the integrated media strategy team within Pfizer, and everything that we're doing right now is putting building blocks into place to really pivot to be much more data-driven, much more audience-focused. And I think there's a pivot happening where we're not just promoting products, we're really solving patient needs. And so there's a mission at the company to change 1 billion patient lives by 2027. And when you think about that, it kind of pivots the way that we go to market and how we think about, what are we really here for? And, one of the coolest things about coming to Pfizer and starting to work in healthcare is that people who work here, and I'm sure it's like this at other companies too in the pharma space, but people truly want to help people. And that's such a cool mission. That's just so different than some of the other brands that I've worked on. And so knowing that, if you think about that from a marketing standpoint, that we're here to provide value and to increase the quality of people's lives and potentially solve problems that have never been solved in the healthcare space. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's like a fundamental mission of saving lives.
Yeah.
And sort of achieving that mission is, something that I think Pfizer, amongst all the brands that you worked with in the past, it fundamentally solves that singular focus and purpose beyond sort of entertainment and enjoyment and lifestyle, which I think it's a great mission.
We can use those things to tell our story.
Well, hopefully you do. And actually, speaking of lifestyle, and I want to save 5 minutes for questions. You have been able to sort of infiltrate or integrate into pop culture. Why don't you share a little bit about Mr. Pfizer, if the room doesn't know, and really what that's all about? And I think it was touched upon with the McDonald's conversation and the very last question on the Taylor question at the end.
I want to ask the room, who's heard of Mr. Pfizer? Okay, all right. So for those of you who don't know, there was a little bit of a back and forth between Travis Kelce and Aaron Rodgers. So Travis Kelce is featured in our vaccine spot this fall. We got super lucky. We secured him before he started dating Taylor Swift. So I had nothing to do with it, but we totally struck gold with that. But during a press conference, Aaron Rodgers said something to Travis Kelce about, egging him on, oh, I can't believe, you're working for Pfizer, you got your vaccine,
and just Aaron Rodgers is he's an anti-vaxxer. He's totally.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of like the two of them sparring a little bit, and Travis took the high road and was kind of he's like, I did get my vaccine and I did it to protect my family, my friends, my teammates, and I stand behind it 1,000%. It was PR in a bottle. We could not have asked for a better statement. But so anyway, that happened, and there was a ton of social media chatter about it. And I'd been working like a dog and had Saturday morning to sleep in. And 7:15 in the morning, my PR agency calls and says, we have to get on the phone. There's a conference call. So I get out of bed, jump on the call, and they're like, okay, Drew sent a note. We need to figure out what do we do about this? The Mr. Pfizer moment. What can we do with this? So within
And Travis, by the way, is Mr. Pfizer. Like in this whole Aaron Rodgers, Travis, he is like, they're like, oh, Mr. Pfizer over there that vaxxed himself up, like from the anti-vaxxer. That's the back and forth. So they basically named him Mr. Pfizer.
yeah, he was like trying to bully him, like,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
exactly.
you're just selling
They're
out
trash
Mr.
talking each
Pfizer.
other.
Yeah. So, so anyway, we ended up putting together within 24 hours a welcome campaign for Mr. Pfizer when he played against the Vikings a week ago Sunday. So we literally had billboards surrounding Minneapolis welcoming Mr.
Like
Pfizer.
around the stadium on all highways, like going in as he's going to play.
So like you couldn't miss it. So anybody in Minneapolis could see this welcome Mr. Pfizer. And then for the people who didn't know what Mr. Pfizer was, we wanted them to go to Google and search it and then see Travis talking about why he is Mr. Pfizer. So it was actually a really cool, fun moment that we jumped on, but it was crazy. So, I mean, it involved the PR agency, our media agency, the creative agency, tons of people within Pfizer. I mean, it was a crazy 24 hours, but it was really fun.
And that's sort of fun. You're taking a pharma brand that has drug names I cannot pronounce, that is basically in the background, and turning it into a pop cultural moment that sort of reinforces making sure to get your vaccine, stay healthy. And I think that's pretty powerful when you think about, you know, the challenges associated with something that really is much more of a, I wouldn't call it a B2B, but I would say it's pharmaceutical company to doctor to prescribe to patient that doesn't know, you know, why they need it even. They just been diagnosed with something, and then realize that, you know, this is something where they can start to feel good about it, and they can be part of sort of a cultural moment.
Yeah, it was fun.
Looking ahead, and this is going to be the last question, then we're going to go to questions. But looking ahead, you know, how do you see things like that, the mission, the vision of Pfizer, starting to manifest itself in media, in marketing, as you start to think about, you know, the taking sort of activating things like this, so that it becomes more of a household name and there's sort of more trust. Like, is there a significant media plan behind that? Is the marketing sort of communications changing? Like, how do you see that sort of manifesting itself out?
Well, I think during the pandemic, when Pfizer was able to bring a vaccine to market in 9 months, that changed the game. So I think we learned during that time that we could do things much more quickly than had been done in the past. And so I think like this rapid response, you know, setting ourselves up proactively to be ready for moments like that is like getting ingrained into the culture now. So, you know, that the fact that we did this with the Travis Kelce, Mr. Pfizer moment, like I think that was a moment in time, and we like had never done that before. That was a first time ever type of thing. And so to be able to do that, and then, you know, hopefully we'll be able to do it again. But yeah, I think, you know, just bringing that vaccine to market, which had nothing really, I mean, it had a lot to do with marketing, but it was really about the scientists creating that vaccine. And, you know, the whole story is told in a book that our CEO wrote called Moonshot. If you guys want to read it, it's super fascinating. I read it when I first got this job, and it really talks about, you know, just what that period was like and all the decisions that were made and the gambles that were taken. And, you know, so being through that and knowing how fast we could move, it's kind of elevated the pace at with which everything is moving today on the marketing side. So we are building that muscle right now.
So it sounds like even the need to come out with a solve for COVID and the speed with which that was developed compared to what Pfizer has historically done over years and years and years, and then the speed with which the FDA approved it, has been sort of a cultural transformative event for Pfizer. And then on the marketing front, you're now given more license to go and take risk and move faster. And so it feels like you're in the middle of this opportunity to sort of transform the speed with which you can get to market, as well as how and where you get to market, to sort of better associate the brand with these sort of moments of health and pop culture in a big way, which is, I think,
Yeah.
really exciting.
Yeah. Which is not how we've been historically.
Well,
So,
I mean, that's why
yeah.
you're there now.
Yeah.
Seven
I mean,
months,
Drew
15.
jokes. He's like, no more people running on a beach during the evening news, right? Like, he's like, no more of that. He's like, we're going to do things differently and show up and surprise and delight people wherever we are.
We didn't get into it. I know that we're going to ask questions, but how does, I guess the last question, I know that's on the creative front, but like, how does those drug commercials where it has like somebody like throwing a ball against a wall and like looking at a balloon that they just let go and it flies up, like, what, I mean, how does that, why is that the formula, I guess, for drug creative on some level?
Bad creative briefs? No. I think because everybody has played in the safety sandbox, and that's why, I mean, drug advertising is really boring, and we don't want it to be that anymore.
Well, it's
So,
almost like nonsensical.
yeah.
It's
I
like,
mean,
somebody's canoeing and they like look back and you're like, okay, what does this have to do with my like asthma?
It's a great question. Yeah. I mean, Nurtec is one of our brands, and they just did a big Lady Gaga campaign because Lady Gaga suffers from migraines, and Nurtec's a migraine medication. So we're trying to do things that are different and kind of driven more by pop culture and things that people care about. But it's really about telling the stories. It's about telling the stories behind the brand that we're focused on.
Amazing. All right, we have time for like one or two questions. Go ahead, right here.
I was going to say, oh, great. It's encouraging to hear that, the message about saving lives is something that you can actually get behind and then get that branding message out first. I think we heard from another marketer at another pharma company about saying that the specific drugs was how they kind of lead with their marketing message. How do you communicate internally the ROI of that kind of messaging, just given that typically it's been about scripts, it's been about specific medications and that competitive landscape? And also, I work for a company called Team Snap, which is a youth sports management platform that does youth sports sponsorship. So getting out in pop culture, I think, is a pretty interesting way to look at it and embracing people's passion points. But I just love to hear more about the ROI piece.
That's a really good question. So at the end of the day, it is all about driving scripts. So everything we're doing is about getting people to ask for our drug when they're ordering a prescription and to get doctors to prescribe more of our drugs, right? So at the end of the day, it really is about ROI, and we've got huge ROI targets that we need to hit. But when we talk about building the Pfizer brand, the whole idea is that it's going to accelerate the ROI growth of any individual product. So we're still going to be promoting products all the time. Like, that is, at the end of the day, people need to understand what the products do and why they benefit patients. But by connecting it to the Pfizer brand, we hope that it accelerates the growth.
That's great. Margie?
I'm curious what you talked a lot about brand loyalty. Oh, thank you. Talked a lot about brand loyalty and building brand trust. And just going off of what you said just now, how are you, like, what media methods are you most excited about to kind of break through the boundaries of pharma and maybe get people a little bit more interested so that they are asking their doctor about the drug? They are going out of maybe what they would have done before and just said, here are my symptoms. Like, all these patients have a very distinct patient journey, and so building brand trust along that journey is obviously very important. So I'm curious what you're considering in terms of those media methods.
So for every campaign that we develop, we are thinking about what are those touch points that we can leverage along the patient journey. And you're right, it's different for every drug. So it starts with deep audience insights. Like, what are the things that they care about? What are the things that somebody with a certain condition is dealing with? And then figuring out how do we connect with them and prioritize the investments that we're making along that journey. So it's not just impressions to drive awareness of the drug. It's like really pulling them through the funnel and connecting both our HCP advertising to the consumer side as well. So that is, I mean, we're in the process of doing that across the board.
Well, I think we're out of time, but Wendy, thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me.